Things looked this morning as though we would have some issues this evening with service. I quickly felt like it was a great opportunity to have a follow-up from last week and the conversation on grief. We were talking just before we started this evening. It seems like the conversation on grief was weeks and months ago, not a week ago. But I felt like this would be a great opportunity, since we already have this evening kind of blocked out for service, to take advantage of that. And so my guests in the studio this evening, my wife is joining the conversation this evening, and then Sister Melissa McGurk is going to join in the conversation this evening. And I want to take a few more moments here at the beginning this evening that I did last week, and just kind of maybe sort of setting the stage, but also hopefully kind of getting your mind open to the fact that maybe there's something that you've kind of overlooked to this point, that you haven't really recognized the impact of it, that the Lord will kind of bring that to your mind this evening, because He wants you to overcome the loss and the impact of it. Last week we did, obviously, if you watched, we mixed it up a good bit, but no doubt one of the primary topics last week had to do with death. We said it and we tried to communicate it, that grieving and loss is not just about death. And so that's another one of my hopes this evening, is that it'll kind of broaden even more for some of you, that maybe last week you kind of checked off each box that was being talked about, and you were kind of like, nope, I'm good, I'm okay. That maybe there are some other areas that the Lord would like to bring to mind. I want to read, start off with Ecclesiastes 3, which is a very familiar passage to a lot of people. But it says this, verse 1, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which was planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up." And this fourth verse to me is very applicable to this discussion, especially the first half of this verse. A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Actually, not the first half, the whole verse. A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. And I think it's very important. I've heard some people sometimes in dealing with loss sort of, I don't know about brag about, but make a big point out of the fact, well, I haven't cried, I didn't cry. Well, the wise man says there is a time to weep, because I think weeping is a part of a God-designed expression and a part of the process. And I don't mean you have to sit around and cry all day long every day, but I think it's a part of it. And so the wise man tells us there is a time for each of these. And there is, I tried in preparation for tonight to dig a little more into Scripture and try to find out some more specifics of what Scripture might say about the process of grieving. And a couple of things that stood out as I was doing that. Numbers 20 and 29 says this: "When all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel." Deuteronomy 34 and 8 says, "And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended." Again, I know this is talking about death with each of these, but in the broader context, I think it's significant that Scripture takes the time to make the point that there was weeping that was connected to loss. And in fact, Jesus himself, when he came to the circumstances that had just taken place with Mary and Martha, I guess not just taken place, Lazarus was dead a couple of days, but the Bible says that Jesus wept. I've heard a lot of opinions on that. I've heard some people say Jesus wept because he was sort of disturbed by their lack of faith and other reasons. I personally think Jesus wept because he was expressing his humanity, that he felt the sorrow, he felt the grief. And from the human side, even though the God side of him was about to perform a miracle, he was connected to the human side. And so it's, it was said last week by a couple, I think Sister Richards and I think Kim said it, the feeling of needing to be strong for others. And I realize there is that at times, but we also, even if we're trying to be strong for others, have got to find our own times and places where we are able to allow those feelings and emotions to be released. So I want to, the other thing I want to do here kind of in the opening is, and I found a couple of things online. I'm pretty sure I got them from reliable sources. I didn't get them from Wikipedia. So I think some other reliable sources. And it just kind of is one of these. The second thing I'm kind of going to read here is kind of a list of some types of losses. Again, for the purpose of broadening your perspective on what may be loss in your own life. The first thing I want to read is this, and I found some, in addition to types of losses, I found some sort of categories of grieving and or types of grief, and I want to read one of those. This type of grief is anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is the reaction to a loss you are able to anticipate, such as when someone is diagnosed with a terminal illness. And we actually kind of touched on that a little bit last week without calling it that when we talked about Sister Kim McGuckian and Brother Glandon and his illness. As soon as we accept and understand someone we love is going to die, we begin grieving. Grief that occurs before the actual loss, and again, the risk of being redundant, I want you to think of loss not just in the context of a death. Grief that occurs before the actual loss can be confusing. We may feel conflicted or guilty for experiencing grief reactions about someone who is still here. We may also feel grief over the loss of things other than the individual, such as loss of hopes and dreams for the future. So, lastly, I want to just kind of go through a list of some types of loss, and then we will get into the discussion. Loss of body function, such as hearing, vision, and I think I'm starting to relate to both of those. So, I may be getting ministry here this evening. Mental capacities, mobility, communication, loss of health, medical conditions, illnesses, disability, debilitating or terminal diseases, loss of home, property, homelessness, natural or man-made disasters, loss of identity, whether through marriage, career, empty nest syndrome, relocation, retirement, loss of independence, change in living situation, such as entering a nursing home, loss of innocence, early sexual experiences, advertising and media influences children to grow up too soon, loss of job, income, layoffs, career change. Another one is loss of role, such as occupation, job, relationship. And I will insert, I think loss of role is one that is fairly common in a ministry setting, either because you're moving on to something else, or you're kind of getting to the end of maybe active ministry involvement because of limitations that may be on you physically. Loss of relationships, of course, death being the big one, but divorce, illness, etc. And then lastly, loss of plans, hopes and dreams for the future, a miscarriage, abortion, stillbirth, etc. So again, I realize some of these we kind of touched on a little bit last week, but I just, my burden tonight is the accepting and not the minimizing of various things that we deal with that affect us. And so we're going to kind of, the ladies here this evening are kind of have a couple of areas they're going to help relate and share with, and then hopefully my desire is to see us focus a little bit more on the kind of not what loss is, but somewhat the process of overcoming that loss. So we're going to kind of begin, I think, with Melissa. I think she has a very applicable perspective to bring to this discussion based on some things that she's been through in the last several years. So Melissa, if you would, maybe kind of just give a little bit of background of education, how long that education took you, showing obviously how much time and effort you put into that, and then kind of what happened. I know a lot of people are aware, but kind of what you went through and kind of where you are now.
Yeah, so I'll start with saying that some people don't know what they want to do when they grow older. But like for their career, I knew when I was in middle school that I wanted to be a nurse anesthetist, and that's where I was going. That was going to be my goal. So I worked extremely hard. It's a very competitive career to get into, and I knew that as a young person. So from the time I was in middle school, I was always like missing out on lunch with my friends, going to get tutored at lunch with all my teachers instead. So I was always, trying to get like 4.0, I have to get a 4.0. And, so it was like a drive I had since I was like in middle school. I knew what I wanted to do. I was going to do it. I was going to work as hard as I had to work to get in and to get accepted into the program. So the same thing in high school, same pressure of, I have to, get perfect grades, to be accepted. Same thing in nursing school. I got accepted to undergrad nursing school for 4 years. I worked super hard and put a ton of pressure on myself that in order to get into the grad program now, I have to be good again. I have to, get really good grades. So I did, and I actually wound up being valedictorian of my undergrad university because, again, that drive, I have to get into this program. So after that, I had to work for about 2.5 years, like a work experience program before they would even accept me into the grad program. It's kind of like a prerequisite of applying to that. So kind of if you count that as part of my education, you would count the 4 years of nursing school, those 2 years, and then 2.5 years straight through of pretty intense, like 15 to 18 hour days of working and then going home, doing a 12-hour shift and then studying 4, 5, 6 hours when I would get home, to be up super early at like 4 a.m. to be in the OR, set up my OR room and my anesthesia table so that everything was in order when the doctors came in, because they were gonna, look at everything, make sure you were ready for your day. So it was like functioning on that kind of level for a straight 2.5 years, and it was very, very intense. But just talking about getting into that program, it was, I applied to a couple different schools, but one of the schools told me, like, the people that applied, it was like, I think 800 applicants, and they only accepted like 23 students. So that's like how, and I knew that since I was in middle school, and I knew that's what I was working toward. And I only tell you that because it was not that I'm anything special, but it was such a drive, and it was such a goal that I knew of for so long that I was working towards, that it kind of changes the perspective of when you lose it, it's like, But anyways, so finished that, and I graduated from Georgetown University with that degree, and I was able to work for about 2 years. And I loved what I did. It was it fit my personality. I was very detail oriented. I was, had plan A, plan B, plan C. If something goes wrong, we're all going to be okay. Like, very organized and good in stressful situations. And it was great, and I loved it. But I didn't. Do you want me to start talking about the accident now? Okay. So I remember it was actually snowing, and it was a snow day, and between my cases I took a selfie of myself, like all my anesthesia, I had my lead vest on, I looked like an alien pretty much. I had goggles, I had my cap on, I had a mask. Probably we all look like that now with COVID, really, but that was my everyday, so I was just documenting, and it was really weird. Like, I remember documenting, taking the selfie, and my patient wasn't in the room, of course, so would not compromise patient care. But I took a selfie of myself, and it was just weird. Like, I had this weird feeling like something was changing. It was really weird. Like, this might be it was just weird. Like, this epic feeling I had that I was home, I was here doing this, and this is real life, and something's about to change. And so anyway, it was just this really weird feeling. Whatever, I finished my day. The next day I came in, and I was working on a case. I think it was like a 5-minute back case. I was doing the anesthesia. The patient was on their stomach, which is kind of a stressful position for an anesthetist, because if something happens, you have to flip them over to intubate them if there's an emergency. So I was very in tune to what was going on, and the patient's oxygen level started going down, so I'm bending over them trying to open their airway from the top, which is you're giving a jaw thrust, but I was over them like this. So I was bent all the way down, and the x-ray tech who was managing the big C-arm, there's a big operating room machine that slides up and down the bed, taking pictures during the procedure of, it's called fluoroscopy, so that they inject the right place. So that machine was moved over my head while I was down, and my alarms were going off because the patient was, oxygen level was going down, and I'm at the point now where I'm okay, we have to flip, or else, this could be bad, there could be a code. So I'm down there, and I whip my head up really fast to look at what his oxygen level was, and I hit the machine at an angle, so my neck tilted down, my neck was to the side, and so whatever, I fell back and was seeing stars and was kind of out of it for a minute. Thank God the patient was okay. He was fine. That was actually my last case of the day, but I remember I opened my eyes and I knew something changed. My eyes were heavy. I felt like I hadn't slept in weeks, just, in the blink of an eye. And I actually was took a break, and I said, I have to go look in the mirror because I feel like my eyes are closed, but they were open. It was really weird. But that was my last case, so I left for the day, and I remember driving home. I could barely function. I could barely focus on the road. I knew something was off. I remember calling my mom saying, Mom, something happened to me. I wasn't even really making sense. She, when I got home, she was calling me because she was you weren't even making sense. Something was off with you. And, yeah, so anyway, what happened was I went to the Head First clinic, and they diagnosed me with a concussion, and they told me to go home and rest. I'd be better in 2 weeks, but I never got better. I still had more problems. So finally, it took about 6 months for them to really understand what was going on. What happened was I had torn a ligament in my neck that holds my vertebra where they're supposed to be. So because of that tear in those ligaments, the vertebra move, and they hit my brainstem in different positions. So it was causing neurologic symptoms like terrible migraines, terrible nausea, dizziness, balance problems, all kinds of things that just weren't going away, and vision problems. I still actually have vision problems, but things will just move when I look at them. So they finally figured all that out, and they were telling me, now you need to go see a neurosurgeon to really fully diagnose that. So I remember going to see the neurosurgeon, and he told me that basically there's really no cure for what I have, because the ligaments are so tiny. and in such a place that's so close to the brainstem that the only thing they could do is fuse me so that I don't move and irritate the brainstem anymore, which would fuse the bottom of my skull, pretty much all the way down my neck. But because of how high my injury is, it's actually a very dangerous procedure. So they only save it for like when, you know, people are having problems breathing and walking. Like, so basically you have to be sicker than I am to have it done, to make it worth it. So I left the doctor with that day. I remember I went home and I was sick over it for a week. I mean, I was basically told, there's nothing we can do to help you. You're miserable. You're just, you know, that irritation on your brainstem could grow worse and worse and worse until the more irritation because you're unstable, the more brain cells are going to be dying. So, you know, your breathing center is in your brainstem, your movement center is in your brainstem, your vital functioning is in your brainstem. So they basically told me that eventually it could get to a point where you can't control your bodily functions, you can't walk, you can't breathe. And then we would, you know, once those symptoms starting, we're going to have to fuse you to protect your life. And it just was not what I was expecting. I thought I had a concussion. I thought I was going to be right back at work the next day, you know, right after my accident. But I do remember the day when I was driving home and I felt so foggy. I felt like the Lord spoke to me and he told me, this was your last day doing anesthesia. So it kind of reminded me of that when I took that selfie. It was kind of like that moment, like, this is it. But I never told my husband that the Lord had spoke that to me, I think till about a few weeks after, when I talked to him, and he had told me that the Lord told him that too, that he was pulling me out of my career to help him in ministry, to help, you know, whatever ministry the Lord has for me. So it was definitely a change, and it was definitely something that I had to grieve for many months. But it affects my functioning in so many ways that I guess the grieving is still kind of taking place because all those things couldn't be fixed by the surgery. So
I guess this may be a little bit of a side road here for a second, but and we've all seen, and many of us have participated, praying for you, believing God is healing you, but also, as you've touched on, still dealing with some of those challenges and not fully recovered at this point. Can you share a little bit? I want to put you on the spot here, but obviously you sit in one of these chairs in these discussions, you're on the spot, so you know. But can you talk a little bit? I guess just some of your process of kind of the combination of you're dealing with what you've lived your whole life for. Even though I will say, and I think this is very important, and I think from my perspective, part of the reason that I don't think there's been bitterness on your part is that even though you said you've since middle school, this is what you were living for. That's what you knew you wanted to do. I will rephrase that. I think first and foremost, your walk with God is your top priority. Mm-hmm. And so I think that to me is probably what has helped some. I mean, when you've given as much time to something as you gave, if I did that math, I think 9 or so years, 8 to 9 years to even get to the point to now do what you've been wanting to do most of your life. So now it's this kind of challenge of this walk of faith and believing God's going to do, but then also I would imagine some of that what if he doesn't. Can you share, because I'm assuming that that's not a you got this all the time kind of a thing?
No. So especially in the beginning, it was just a journey of grief, kind of. It would come at times where I actually had a brain injury at the same time, so it did affect my cognition, and a lot of people, I hide it really well, I hope. But I'm actually in cognitive therapy right now because I can't function. I'm so disorganized. I can't put things away. I can't keep my house clean. There's just so many things that are completely unrelated to like the medical diagnosis and losing the career that are actually losses in my situation, including that. I mean, I was always so high energy and, you know, clean and just kept everything organized, and now I feel like I'm a bad wife at times, and I've had to kind of deal with like the loss of being the perfect wife that was up before her husband was, you know, up and had his shirt ironed. Like my mom, you know, was always ironed my dad's shirts early in the morning, would press them, and they were perfect, and I wanted to be that. I wanted to do that for my, you know, husband because he's in the ministry, and I just feel like I would love to do that kind of thing for him and, you know, keep him organized, which I could have done very easily before my accident. He's probably lucky that I got hurt. But so now it's just like I feel like he's keeping me organized, and that's interesting in itself.
Tables turning.
Right. So I mean you got that loss as well, and also just the loss of like I feel like nobody's the same after a brain injury, no matter what. And I think everybody thinks you're either completely fine or you're like, I don't mean to say this disrespectfully, but like a vegetable, like, you know, like completely brain damaged. And there's like this continuum in between where you have problems with so many different areas that people can't see. So you look completely normal, and that's one of the biggest parts of my illness. Sometimes I wear my neck brace in when I go to the doctor just because everything about my injury and loss is invisible, completely invisible, and people think that it's not happening, or that I'm better, or that I've recovered, or that it's gone, and it's not. I carry it with me every day, and the loss of certain things. I remember, here's another loss. I remember going into the doctor, and it was the neurosurgeon, and he told me that if I choose to have children, I could get a lot worse because the hormones would make my joints loose, which would work on my neck the same way it would work on any other joint, and that I could get very ill and need the fusion surgery, risky fusion, right away. So it was like, okay, here goes my career, here goes my health, here goes my dream of being a good wife, my dream of keeping a neat house. I love decorating, and now it's just really hard to pull anything together. And then, here's my dream of being a mother. Here's, my finances were a mess after my job because, it took a while for all of that to get worked out. So we were on a very limited income while this was going on. And it was just a loss in so many different ways. I remember one time, the process of grieving, things would arise at certain times where I'd realize, oh, I can't do that either, or oh, I can't do that. I remember my husband shortly before my accident bought me a beautiful bike for my birthday. It was like a cruiser, like a baby blue with a white leather seat. Oh my goodness, I was so excited about it. And I think I rode it one time, but I'm not allowed to do things like that anymore. I can't do rides, I can't do anything active, any ice skating, any of working out, all the kind of activities that I used to love to do. So, for a while it was like constantly discovering new things that I couldn't do and just had to kind of lose and grieve over. So, there were definitely times of crying, and my husband was a great support in the process. He was always, positive Pete, like, this is miserable, and he's just, it's gonna be okay, and thank God I had that because I needed it.
I guess one more thing, and then we'll change hot seats here for a little bit. But as you were talking, and I was thinking back to last week and the question that I posed. I wish I'd have vetted my questions prior to the, but the question I posed to Sister Richards about, I think I asked kind of what's worse or more difficult, spouse versus a child, and the point that she made was you really can't compare. And I think as you were talking, I was reminded of that, and I think it's so important because you made the point, and I think it's very true. And I think I've been, as your pastor, and Mike is actually off camera over here. It's kind of our subconscious thing to want to look at it, but I keep finding myself wanting to do that. So I've been fairly aware of the things you guys have been dealing with now through all of this, and I think it's such an important point that it's easy to judge people by how they carry themselves, by how they look. That, and as you said, we sitting here looking at you, we'd never know some of these. And I think, and the main point I want to make with that again is the not to minimize, for an individual to not minimize, it's your loss. We could sit here and go, well, I mean, at least you haven't lost a spouse, or at least that's in some ways okay, but that doesn't at all negate the significance of the impact on you. And I think that's what's, again, I guess kind of one of my burdens in these two sessions at this point is I think we have a tendency to compare. I sit here and thankfully I have my first wife is sitting here with me and my only wife, and all four of my children are alive and overall healthy. And I know I found myself when I've looked at some of the things that are my losses going, well, suck it up, get over it, because you're not dealing with this or that or whatever. And the bottom line is, and I think especially as a child of God, we have to be confident in this. God purposefully knows what each one of us needs as a part of our path and our process. So I know that many of you know my wife's story. She's testified about her mother's passing and all that, and but wanted her kind of on here as a little bit different perspective of a couple of other areas of loss, and I'll just kind of throw one out as a little bit of a starting point, and kind of just wherever it goes from there. But she's had 4 miscarriages and 4 kids, and sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the thought if we'd not have had 4 miscarriages and 4 more kids. Wow.
We've been a lively bunch.
But anyway, I know that's let me say this again, and I know there will be probably a few more people watching that can relate to this part. Maybe some of the specifics from Melissa, but I want to state it again. None of these discussions are about saying this is the way, the right way, the wrong way, because every person has kind of probably a little bit of a different reaction and a way of processing things. So if nothing else, again, just kind of a way of stirring up thought. So.
Yeah, so I had 2 miscarriages. We were about our 3rd and 4th year into marriage. The first 2 were extremely difficult because obviously we're excited about our first child. And then 8 weeks into it, had a miscarriage, and then next pregnancy, very excited again. The first one, that had to been a fluke thing. It's all good. We're bound to, this one's gonna be okay. And then 10 weeks into that one, I lost the second baby. And so it gives you a lot of anxiety moving forward with getting pregnant again. You put a lot of hope into all that. And so in '96, we got pregnant with Elizabeth. We were pretty nervous, But once we hit about the 14 week mark, we felt really good about it. And so sure enough, along came Elizabeth in 97. And then, ooh, surprise! Elizabeth was 9 months old and found out I was pregnant with Esther. And then 2 years after Esther came Timothy. So basically, when Timothy was born, we had 3 children that were 3 and under. So it definitely started to make up for those 2, it felt like the 2 losses, And so I think what he was saying about everybody deals with things differently and perspectives change and things like that. Those first 2 felt very, very hard, very difficult. But when Timothy was 9 months old, this was the point at which most people teased us that we needed to get a TV. Found out I was pregnant again. And the comments, oh my word, the comments, And I was at that point, and if you've heard any of my testimony, I do talk about how the Lord dealt with me in this this would have been, I guess, a 6th pregnancy. This pregnancy threw me off really badly. I, for the first time ever, had the feeling like I don't want to be pregnant. I don't want another baby. I'm freaking out. I can't do this. These kids are, I'm freaking out. And so that was a whole new experience. And to be quite honest with you, I was ashamed of myself. I felt so much shame for feeling that way. Especially I had a good friend at the time who could not get pregnant, and so I would just weep and weep, just feeling so ashamed of myself. What is wrong with you, Angie? And so it was actually during that time too that the Lord really dealt with me and kind of said, imagine how your mom felt. So when I was 3 years old, my mom found out she was pregnant. She had 3 stair-step kids, and when she got to the 4th pregnancy, she freaked out and she had an abortion. And I had judged her for years and years over that abortion. And it was like, wow, sitting there in that moment, looking at 4th child coming, freaking out, not sure how I can do it. And it's just like the Lord just showed me how to have mercy on her and look back with mercy. So it was this really big divining point in some of my forgiveness process towards my mom. But it was super crazy because for whatever reason, the midwives I was working with were like, you're fine. You can come see us at about 12 weeks. It's fine. Been there, done that. Got the t-shirt, know how to have babies. And I actually had put off the first appointment until the 14th week. Huge mistake. And they don't really do a lot of this stuff anymore, but we're going back 22 years, so. I was scheduled to go in for my first exam at 14 weeks, and I started to miscarry, and I knew this was really bad miscarriage. Wound up in the ER, and they did a sonogram on me and basically reported that I was not carrying babies at all. I had been growing a tumor basically inside of me. It's called a molar pregnancy, and I was stunned. I was hemorrhaging. I was just told that I didn't in fact even have a baby inside of me. I was then told that the procedure they had to do was going to be so bad, so difficult, and so sensitive that if it goes badly, they might have to do an emergency hysterectomy. So I'm basically told, and that if they don't get all of it out, it could grow inside of me further and cause ovarian cancer and all this crazy stuff. So I literally am sat there and I'm hemorrhaging in the hospital with no doctor in sight helping me, my poor husband. I am being told that I could have cancer. I'm being told that I could have a hysterectomy. And I'm just flipping. So at that point, I think I just lost it. They wheeled me in for emergency surgery, and I was home by the next morning. And to deal with what felt like this huge, like, okay, God, what kind of cruel joke was this? First pregnant, I don't want to be pregnant, I get over it, I'm, whatever, happy, and then I'm elated, yes, and we're having another baby, this is awesome, only for all this to happen, find out, like, I wasn't even carrying a baby. So it was the weirdest time. And so I guess about 9 months after that, I got pregnant again, because we felt very strongly that we were going to have 2 boys. Had the 2 girls, and we thought we were going to have 2 boys. So I don't know if we're just gluttons for punishment. I don't know why. I think a lot of people would have just given up and said no more. And I wound up 9 months later having another miscarriage. At that point, I was done in, and I really did not think we would have any more. I didn't think I could do it. And I know I say surprise, it's not really a surprise, but surprise! I was pregnant, and definitely freaking out over this one, freaking out. And 9 months later, Nathaniel came along. And so, yay for Nathaniel, he's a huge blessing in our life. So I'm glad we didn't stop at 3, but all that said, I think miscarriage is a bit of a topic that's kind of not talked about a lot, and there's a lot of things I learned from it. One of the biggest things was there's just not any right or wrong necessarily. The first 2, like I said, it was total loss, total grief, total, at that 3rd one, even as dramatic and as horrible as it was, I still had those 3 toddlers at home, and I was still freaking out. And I confess there was a bit of relief too that happened. And I've counseled and talked to other mothers, and while I want to feel ashamed of that, I've just come to recognize that we're just each different, and we're each at a different phase in our life, a different stage, and all those things. And so it's like, it's like what you just said. We can't judge each other because we haven't walked a mile in each other's shoes, and so we don't really know. It took me a long time to even accept the fact that I felt some sort of relief, because like I said, I felt so much shame over that. But I had to realize that grief process, like, I had to just stop every time and take a minute, just take that pause. And, a lot of it too is the loss of control. I guess it's just what I came to realize in life. So much of life is totally out of our control. It doesn't matter. And that's one thing that miscarriage is, it's a real puzzlement. There's not one doctor that could tell us why I kept miscarrying. I have no idea why. And so it's just one of those losses that is often extremely just unexplained. It's completely out of your control. And I think that's just one thing that resonates with me, and with a whole lot of things in life, is that you're just not in control, and how you deal with that is a huge part of the process. We say that there's not good and bad grief, but the fact is there really is bad grief, in a sense, because if you really can't accept that God is God and He's in control and I am not, you can go down a really bad path of accusing God. And if you were in my session a few weeks ago, and it's on the list to read The Prisoner in the First Cell, the bottom line is, are you willing to follow a God that does not meet your expectations? Are you willing to follow a God that you cannot understand? And it's like, in my opinion, we could sit here and talk about every scenario of loss, and the bottom line, I think, with so much of it is we don't understand it. Why? The infamous why. Why is this happening to me? Why do I have to go through this? Why, God, I'm this, I'm trying to live for you. I'm trying to do all the right things. I'm trying to, cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and yet I'm still going through all this stuff. And the infamous why, it doesn't even help to ask that question. The real question in the room is, can I follow a God? Can I serve a God who I don't understand, who does things in my life or allows things in my life that he's in control. And I don't know. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I learned from all of that is I'm just simply not in control of my life. And a number of other areas, like he touched on, goodness, you said loss of innocence, but there's another one that resonated with me. The loss of innocence, that was an interesting one. And what I mean by that is, if everybody knows our story, yes, we were virgins when we got married. So I don't mean that. I mean, it wasn't until we were married and I took away our 12-year-old Elizabeth to teach her about purity and teach her about the birds and the bees, for lack of a better. Poor Elizabeth. She probably does not like it when I tell this story, but little Precious was raised in a godly home, and I took her away and we had this great weekend, and I'll never forget coming home and falling apart in my bedroom, completely falling apart, sobbing, and realizing I was grieving over what I was not given in my life, was not given by my parents. I didn't have the parents who did that and taught me, everything in the proper way. And in fact, worse, I saw pornography when I was 4 years old, as early as 4, all the way through into my teen years. I was exposed to pornography on and off. And, wow, that's not the way to learn about life. And so all the shame and all the guilt and all that junk that comes with that. But it really hit me. So, when you say loss of innocence, I feel like everybody immediately jumps to, I don't know, whatever, sex before marriage in the backseat of a car, whatever. Like they're just, and honestly, I didn't deal with that loss of innocence until I was a grown married woman and staring at my precious daughter who was receiving a great wholesome life, and feeling like I really had to grieve that, so things like that, I think along the way I've had to grieve. So I feel like I'm talking a lot.
I think before we go back to Melissa for a minute, just kind of continuing along those lines, because I think there's people that can relate that, and you've expressed this before, but you're sort of watching your children grow up with things that you never had, a stable home, good parents, and that sort of triggers also loss, because you look back at what you didn't have. And I think there's a variety of things that can happen from that. One of them is you can become bitter towards your own family because they've got what you didn't have. I guess, could you just touch on that for a moment?
Not being bitter,
yeah.
Being better. Honestly, I've talked to a number of parents who struggle with this. I don't ever want to assume that everybody knows my whole story, but my parents divorced when I was 8. We tossed back and forth between mom and dad, living with mom and dad. My dad got saved shortly after they got divorced. And then by the time I was 15, my mom died. And so we obviously lived with my dad full time after that. And all that to say, my parents, were a hot mess. All I remember was arguing. There was some fun times, and the Lord has helped to bring back some fun times. But all that to say, there have been a number of times, more times than I can count, that in a strategic moment in time, I can remember one exactly on a Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was a really big deal to me as a kid. My mom would go all out. She was an amazing chef. And everybody wanted to go to Pam's house for Thanksgiving. But it would always end up in a huge family fight. Just, oh my word, my mom's family, they're all hotheads. I'm yelling and screaming. And as kids, so I have all this crazy emotions when it comes to Thanksgiving, because it's like, it's all this great food, and my mom made this big deal out of it and watched the Macy's Day Parade, but then it always ended. Like, I mean, one time we had to call the police because my uncles were fighting. I mean, yelling and screaming. So just crazy stuff like that. But so fast forward, I just remember this Thanksgiving in which, my word, Esther Lauren, the child would not eat something I put on her plate for breakfast. It was little piece of ham. She didn't like the trim around that Canadian bacon or ham, whatever. I don't even know. And I'm just sitting there staring at her, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Just eat it. And I felt things escalating. I know it seems really foolish, but it's these moments in time that are real that you have to stop and pay attention. I felt myself escalating for no good reason, and she's getting worked up, and she's escalating, and I don't remember how old she was, like 10 or something. Remember that? So something in me caught me and said, do you want your children to have this memory? Do you want Esther to remember Thanksgiving like this? And it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I just said, it's fine, honey, bring it over here. I'll cut it off for you, whatever. And I just cut off the edge. Fine, take your stupid ham without the edge on it, whatever. So, because, I mean, really, truly, it was not a big deal. But it just so many times, I think, as parents, we, I could have easily, we let things escalate. I don't know, this isn't a parenting session, but the thing that's helped me was to not be bitter, but to be better. Part of it is I challenged myself year after year as the kids got older that I was not going to, for them to not have those same memories that I had. And it is a conscientious mental decision that you make. Sometimes we can over spiritualize it, and yes, there are times that, my goodness, I just end up in my room crying and praying to keep the situation from escalating into something that's going to be a horrible memory. So yes, it is spiritual, but at the same time, it's very much a mental decision. And because bitterness breeds bitterness, and so if we don't stop that cycle, then we just perpetuate in family life. And then before you know it, your kids grow up, have the same exact memory you did of, whatever. And so, that's why it's a determination of mine to stay married. I mean, my grandparents were divorced, my parents were divorced, It was likely, statistics prove, that I should be divorced right now. And I refuse to let that statistic rule my life. And so, I don't know.
Listen, I'm going to come back to you, and I think this may be kind of my final question for the evening. But I think, to me, one of the unique things about your circumstances is a lot of times grieving and loss has to do with something that's basically done and in the past. And you've already alluded to it, things that pop up here and there, that you can't do this or different things. But to me, all of that kind of speaks to this sort of an ongoing process that you're in. And I guess if you could just talk a little bit about how you deal with that. What is your approach to maintaining a right attitude and a right spirit when, again, you've got these things that are, it's not a set done deal. You now know the full impact. You're still, and then as we said, we're all still believing that God is healing and going to heal. And so you're also in that back and forth, I would imagine, as well. So, what's your process, if I could put it that way?
And part of it, I don't know if you call it what I said earlier is the more I move my neck, the more they say I'm killing brain cells, which are in my brainstem, which, the trajectory, if you look ahead, if I look ahead based on what they've told me, I could end up not being able to walk and control my body functions and breathe. So, it's been also balancing, like, not allowing fear to come in and just take over me because I've already lost so much, but then there's also the impending threat of losing, you know, more function and more ability on top of all the other things I've lost. So, you know, I think one of the things that's helped is really putting up boundaries against fear, because fear tried to come in and really wreak havoc on my life, like in the first probably year, I would say, after my accident to 2 years, which I was so foggy in my brain, it was kind of hard to know what was going on, but fear was like really attacking me because of that. But I mean, I've just listened to basically what Bishop preaches is casting your cares, and wow, this is a big one, but that means I just have to cast it extra far, because if it's close to me, I'm going to pick it up every day and I'm going to worry about it. I'm going to make decisions based off of it. I'm not going to do this because I'm scared. I'm not going to, you know, do this because I'm scared. I'm going to make myself worse. You know, I had to get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to wear my neck brace in the car anymore, because, you know, for a while I was so scared. What if I get in an accident and it's not on, and, you know, kaput. And I can't live like that. I just can't live like that. And eventually I had to make a decision that the fear, I'm not going to let it rule me. My life, like going back to what Sister Angie was saying, is when things like this happen to you, you know that you literally have no control. And for somebody who is always in control, complete control of everything, this was like such a learning opportunity, and I see it as a complete blessing that the Lord, well, I wish it didn't have to come this way, but I'm taking advantage of the lesson, because I think every loss comes with a lesson.
Wow.
And if we don't embrace that lesson, you know, I feel like either another loss is going to come, or another situation, the Lord's going to try to teach you that same lesson. So I'm telling the Lord, you know, I'm going to learn this lesson. I'm going to give you control. I'm not going to worry about, you know, what you decide for my life, and I'm going to trust you completely with every aspect of this. And so that's kind of my perspective on how I've gotten through loss. And I'll say one thing that's actually helped me is, as a little girl, my, you know, spiritual idol was Nona Freeman, and she wrote a book called Potholes in the Sky, and it was about like all the times where she just had like travel mishaps, but the Lord would always tell her ahead of time, like, you know, something's about to happen on this plane. And so when she'd be on it, and then all of a sudden the plane would like take a nosedive, like she was like, I was totally calm. And as a little girl, I that was in my heart. I loved her books, and I read it, and I'm like, I want to be like that. Like, I want that outlook. Like, I want to walk with Jesus like that, because I will go through anything. I'll walk through anything with the Lord, but if I just know He's with me, or He gives me a hint, or He tells me that I'm in His hand at the time, I'm okay, and I'll walk through it with Him. And it was actually really cool, because about 3 or 4 months before my accident, I came home from work one day, and Michael remembers this. I started crying for no reason. It was so weird, and I told him, I looked at him, I said, Michael, nothing's ever going to be the same. I said, something's coming. And I said, I don't know what it is. I said, but nothing's ever going to be the same. And that's all I kept saying. Nothing's ever going to be the same. And I was crying my eyes out. And he was, I don't know what his perspective was on what he was thinking, but I didn't know what it was. But that was I know now. And like when I look back on like what happened the months before, the Lord was preparing things that I never knew I would need. And so then when you have that realization, you're like, you know, it makes it a little bit easier, because you know He's walking with you, and you know He's holding your hand. And then the second thing that happened, I can't go into too much detail about this one, but the Lord put something on my heart. My accident was in January. In November, the Lord put something on my heart that I needed to take care of, about my career and just about my future, you know, retirement, you know, like purposes, you know, disability-wise and things like that. The Lord put a strong burden on my heart that you have a very involved job. If you lost a finger in an accident, you know, you went to all this schooling, and it would be kaput if, you know, you lost a finger or something. So, you know, people with those kind of jobs have to make preparations for if something happened, you know, some kind of insurance, you know, something like that. So the Lord put that very heavy on my heart, and I obeyed, and I actually told Michael about it at that time, like 2 months before my accident. He thought I was crazy. He's like, you're young, you're fine. You know, it's a lot of money, you know, we should put money towards that kind of thing. But it was on my heart, and it was the Lord who did that. And
Wow.
I'm telling you, if I didn't listen to that,
Mm.
my life right now would be completely different. I probably would have lost my home.
Wow.
I don't know.
Mm.
We lost our cars. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. But the thing is that God is so merciful that He looks ahead, and see, that's what makes me be able to trust Him in this kind of terrible situation, is that He was looking ahead before I knew that it was going to happen, and He was helping me, He was preparing me, He was warning me, He was working on this heart, He was preparing me. And I think that He does that in a lot of situations. I think sometimes it's hard to notice, but I think that really helps me have comfort and strength going through.
For sure.
The statement you made, every loss comes with a lesson. Wow. And that is that is so powerful. And I think it's the lack of learning the lesson that opens the door for bitterness.
Yeah.
And it's, to some degree, it is the learning of the lesson that validates and makes the loss more bearable. Not that it takes it away, but wow. I guess I'll come back to my better half for one more point here, and kind of more so kind of focus to the process. And you were talking a little bit today, I think you referenced Psalms 23 and some of the things that it says in there that I think relates to this process of grieving and overcoming. Would you?
Yeah, so, I don't know if when Psalm 23 was written, if it was intended to be in that specific order per se, because Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. And goes on to say, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. And, it just, the one thing I have to say to everybody is, at some point, if you walk through that valley of the shadow of death, you have to also lie down in green pastures. You have to, a lot of times we get through something and things get better or feels better. I was even thinking about Sean Whaley recently. I've kept his the little program from his funeral on the console of my car. And I was kind of doing like they did with Moses, and I was mourning for a month. But I just, but I've actually done that on purpose, because I feel like sometimes what we do is things get better, and we never really stop and take a minute. We never lie down. And to me, when I think about that lying down in green pastures, it's like, to me, it's like such a contrast to the valley of the shadow of death. That's the terrible place, that's the dark place, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to just skip around when I'm in the green pastures, when really the Lord is saying, no, that's the time you need to take a minute, and you need to grieve, and you need to let go, and you need to, because it's where I think too, when is it even a scripture, He won't put more on us than we can bear? I don't know if that's something we made up. It's not quite like that, but it's something we've twisted around a little bit. But I do believe he doesn't want to break us, I mean, maybe our will, but He doesn't want to break us. So in other words, I think sometimes He kind of waits for the green pasture, and He's waiting for us to be still and in His presence, and He's waiting for that, because that's when He wants to speak. Because if when we're in it, and going through it, if He's trying to, pour on the lesson and pour on everything, while we're in it, I mean, it could break us. It's too much. It's like I always say about the onion that gets peeled back layer by layer. You cut straight through it, and your eyes, you can't handle it. So, but the key is that we have to lie down. We have to stop, and we have to let the Lord heal us. And I just feel like, and especially in this day and time, we just go and do, and we never really truly stop and take that time, be it just your morning prayer time or just in his presence. I think it's even what we're doing with Engage, just alone time in the presence of God and letting him restore your soul. I think that that's what it's all about. It's those times to me that he peels back some things and says, you know, you need to grieve this. That was a loss for you. You need to you know, look back at that part in your life, and he reveals things to us when we stop and take a minute. So I feel like that's a really critical part of the process. And they touched on it last week a little bit. I know Jalen had said that. And it's really easy to just, you know, go and do and not stop. But I think it's a part of that process. So.
Well, as we said last week, we probably could go on and on this evening, but I think we'll bring it to a close here. There was a statement I thought of today. I can't remember the exact statement. I feel like I heard it in actually the Conquer series, Conquer DVD series that deals with overcoming pornography. It was there or some other, I think, similar type of thing, and I can't remember the exact way it was said, but the gist of it really stuck with me this afternoon with regards to this, and that is, I'll say it this way, the process of grieving is not a strictly linear progression where you're constantly just moving forward, making progress. I can't remember in the quote that I heard if it was cyclical or circular, but in essence, I think it's more like a loop. And the thing we miss about that is you actually can make a loop and end up making forward progress, but there's a portion of that loop where you actually feel like you're going backwards. And I think it's in that moment as we're progressing through this process that we get discouraged, hopeless. We start questioning, am I really progressing? Is God really healing me? Am I really over? Because there's that moment again of kind of a backwards, but by the time we make it through another cycle, we've actually made some progress. And again, I guess another one of my burdens in these 2 weeks is I think we have to be very realistic, and I think last week it was communicated and I've heard it here this evening. But it is an ongoing process. It's not just this smooth line moving forward. Whether it's a new challenge that comes up or another thing from the past that is brought up that takes us to another layer, another level of recognizing loss and things we need to work through, things we need to grieve over. We don't need to get too bogged down in that brief moment of feeling like, wait a minute, I'm going backwards, because maybe to a degree you are, but it's a part of that process of moving forward. So if tonight's your first one of these conversations to hear, I would encourage you to go back and listen to last week, and a lot of other things were covered, a lot of other types of loss and the process for that. And I trust that in these 2 weeks, the Lord, again, I'm not so much as concerned about those of you that have the big things you can relate to, because you're probably listening pretty well. I think one of the things I felt very burdened for in these 2 weeks is those that may be discounting some things that are loss and have an impact, and that there's a lesson in that loss. So how about we close with a word of prayer this evening. Father, I pray right now those that may be watching this evening, watching live as we've had this conversation, but also for someone that in the future will watch this. I pray, God, that whatever the losses are they're dealing with, if it's the kind of loss that we all recognize as being the big losses, and we understand that those big losses have an impact on us, and we've got to overcome them. We've got to grieve them. Or if it's those, God, that maybe we don't relate to the deaths or the big tragedies, but there are things that every one of us has experienced that's a loss. And it really doesn't matter what the loss is. We are impacted by the losses that you allow, that you choose in our lives for our growth and development. I pray, Father, tonight for every individual that maybe they've yet to really embrace the process of grieving their losses, whatever they are. Lord, that they might find healing and wholeness. I pray that you would help them to be willing to embrace that process. Things that they may have chosen to bury and ignore, thinking that was the only option. God, I pray that you would, by your grace, give them the strength to embrace the process that you've ordained, that they might find healing and wholeness, and that they might learn the lesson, God, that you are wanting to teach through that loss. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your power to heal us, to bring us to restoration in our minds, our hearts, our spirits. In Jesus' name, amen.